All right. Well, I was asking my wife and my daughter before we came here. So why am I doing this to myself? At the moment, I'm a practicing architect. I used to teach for a few years also in Bloemfontein at the University of the Free State. Some of our students are here. It's actually very nice to see them from time to time, not all the time. Um, all right. 5 years ago, I left the university and I decided to go into private practice. At the moment, I'm working for a company, K&K. They're based in Durban, and they've opened an office in Bloemfontein. So where my family still is. Okay, my daughter started working as an architect now in Pretoria. So yeah, very much hit by the illness of architecture in the family, but we do enjoy it. So that's good. What I'm presenting today is really just to show I've done quite a bit of research while I was at the university, simply on design thinking and how you interact with the design process. So for me, that was always very interesting, and I've decided that, well, I want to know more about it. I've learned quite a bit about it, and sometimes even the two of you, when you were talking, there was a specific time where you referred specifically to a moment where you just realized, well, this is what the client wants, this is what I want. So in design, I think our biggest problem is usually we're almost overwhelmed from time to time with what we need to address and what we need to design and how are we accessing it, what are we doing. So I've decided to talk about bisociation as a driving force in design. And while I was reading about design and design thinking, there was just this one thing that came up all the time, that you have to weigh certain options against each other and not necessarily related to one another. And simply because of the tension in between the two, you get to new solutions. So bisociation is basically the term that refers to that. And it is not discipline bound. It's literally something that you can use anything from just writing to architecture to art, and even if you're running some kind of even research on a more scientific level. You'll always run into certain areas or a certain point where there's no way forward, and then it's always good to have something that you can put up against what you already know about something. Okay. So as I already explained, bisociation, I came across the term simply by doing some research on design thinking, and that was just to understand the methods and processes to create applicable tools to assist design tasks. So design task does not refer to a specific field. It really is not field specific. And then Herbert Simon, he became quite involved in the whole development of artificial intelligence, but he was actually a mathematician. So simply to understand decision making, he started to study psychology, and then he had this whole thing about what is it that we really need to address when we design. So he, in the end, broke down everything to three specific things. He said you get structures, you get systems, and then there's the interface. So many of the things that we as architects refer to is usually always the system, or the interface, because it's how do you present it to a client, what it looks like, how it will feel like, what it will, almost the emotional human response to what we've designed. But that's not all that we need to design. It still needs to access all of the rest of it that I think the two of you so well explained. How you build a building, what systems is all about, structure, where does it start from? And that structure, systems, and interface, you get it literally over everything. But when we as architects interact with design, our main focus really is the interface of what we're busy working on. Now, the origin of the term bisociation the term was coined by Arthur Koestler. You can see there at the third point. Now, he had two colleagues, Coleridge and Lamb, and they were always punning and making jokes about everything. And he saw it as a very creative process. And simply because of the creativeness of how you talk and how you bring two completely different things and then make a connection or a verbal knot between the two and present that, there was always humor. And just a good example is the second point, where the one guy says to the other guy, promise lamb, and not to be so sheepish. And he replied, I will. You know? So it's just to say, well, I know what you're hinting at, and I'm okay with it, and I will elaborate on it. Okay, so Arthur Koestler wrote a book, The Art of Creation, and this isn't a new book, it's an old book actually. It was published in 1966, I think. What he aimed to do, my wife's looking at me, I was born in 1966, so if I refer to an old book, I'm not a book. All right, so the act of creation, what he was aiming to do was actually to analyze the creative process in such a way that it becomes scientific knowledge. I think you also referred to how people try to, the moment when architects are involved, our biggest problem, how we need to establish ourselves on a site, whether you're male or female, is the whole thing that people think we are busy with something that's not a truth, okay? And that it's fluid, and if you decide to change it, you can change it because it doesn't affect anything really. But it really does affect how you interact and how you identify with something. All right, so, and the only term that comes from this book that was actually recognized by the scientific community was actually the whole thing with bisociation. So, and that was, there were a few people after that specifically also tried to have a scientific approach to the design process, like Edward de Bono. And he also said creative people tend to have an A, B, C, E, G, H process. So it is where you've got A, B, C, suddenly there is a new stimuli that's been introduced, and you can understand, and you get to a new conclusion that actually makes a better solution than what you were aiming for. Okay, so there's no sharp boundary splitting the bisociation experienced by the scientist from the experience by the artist, the savage, or the gesture. This is what Arthur Koestler was saying. He was saying the creative act moves seamlessly from the aha of scientific discovery to the ah of aesthetic insight to the aha, the pun and the punchline. He says the way that it works is actually very similar. Now then, if you look at the whole thing about putting one thing up against something else, there's a guy in Toronto, or at the Toronto School of Business, Roger Martin, who started studying how business people work. And from what he's writing, sorry, there's not a clear line that he ever read someone like Arthur Koestler. His main focus was to understand how business work and why certain business people are so incredibly successful. And then he got to this whole thing that people are putting one thing up against something else. And then he started researching that. And when he started to research that, then somewhere he asked himself the question, what makes us as people so successful? Why did we evolve differently from animals? And then he came to this whole theory of the opposable thumb. Now, the opposable thumb is one of the theories in evolution that says simply because we do have an opposable thumb, we have the ability to put certain things up against something else, and that's what helped us to evolve mentally. On the one hand, it might be true, but on the other hand, the moment you feel something on your skin that you actually have to get yourself to a new situation, that is more how people respond to a certain situation. I just put this in there because the lady who wrote this article on our opposable thumb, she's a civil engineer, and while she was studying, she took a proposal to professors to say, well, I think we can start to manufacture topsoil from waste materials. And he just said, no, we're not going to do that. It's not a good proposal. in the end, she did continue with it. She did this research on it, and in the end, it became a business. So in a way, that's already how to put something up against something else. And the whole thing of bisociation, to say that waste as a waste material can actually be topsoil. And then she was just going into what makes things work, and are we still focused on a solution if we don't even know whether we're going through a process that we can't see? Okay, then Roger Martin said, in the same way that you can get the as something that's opposed to the other fingers on your hand, found with business people was that they've got the incredible ability to hold two opposing concepts in their mind, and then by blending the two, they come up with a solution that's actually a better solution. So what he's actually talking about is bisociation, although he never called it that. Now what he says what we need to do is, in a creative task, creative people to somewhere halfway between the process would somewhere abduct themselves from the situation, which he calls abductive thinking, try to look objectively at two different things, try to analyze each one for exactly what it is, and then start to blend it together in something new. And I think if you, the slide that you two showed was of the Michelangelo, and then one of the more almost anonymous glass buildings that you get everywhere. And to say, well, in the one hand, I would like to have something that's more clean, but I've got a client that needs more reference in his life, and maybe the reference gives a lot of people a lot of validation. So if we take something away from them, what do we give them back to make it worth their while to stay invested in a project? And I think it's an important question. On the one hand, we need to help or propose things that help our clients to move in a certain direction, but we cannot completely ignore who they are. All right. So in the same line of thinking, he was just referring to Isidore Sharp then, who said, well, we do have low-budget motel units. That's always hotel type of environments that was developed for families. And then you get your very high-end hotels that was designed for business people. And Isidore Sharp was the guy who started the Four Seasons hotels. And he just said, no, we need to blend the two. It needs to become something where a family can actually go. If the husband needs to go to a meeting, and go to his meeting, but why can't the family enjoy the same privileged treatment? And then it become a family high-end hotel. So that's basically what bisociation is aiming for. So yeah, then I just want to show you the Westville in Joburg. It is a Four Seasons hotel. And if you experience that place, I mean, it is great to have that environment, but then be pampered, and then also have the opportunity to have business meetings, etc., in the same environment. Same with the Four Seasons in Cape Town. If you look at it, it can accommodate families, but it is also very high-end and can be enjoyed by families. Okay. I'm not going to talk about that. That's basically just how bisociation works. Now I'm talking about it. You have something that you want to do and you know what the outcome is, but then you try to put it away completely and you say, well, what do I want to do? And you try to define that. After you've done that, you introduce a stimulus that's completely different from anything that connects to that project. And then in the third instance, you try to just document what you can say about the things that's on the table. And then you try to blend it. Like taking, for instance, a photo frame. You want to frame a photo, but then you take the frame completely away and just say, okay, I need to have a picture on the wall. How am I going to do it? Does what needs to hold it there? And that would be the process that you're going through. Now, in design, we're always faced with some kind of a dilemma, some kind of a question, something that challenges where we are and where we've been in the past. We wouldn't need design if we've known the road already to it. So design as an activity already says that you're facing something that you don't know. Okay. So in a way, it is the moment when you face something that you don't really know that people start to try to make small steps. Okay. But you need to be able to structure your approach to something. And maybe the best, well, I was looking for a building that might help us to explain the whole thing about bisociation. So I looked at John Novell and the Louvre at Abu Dhabi that he designed. And what he said is, I wanted a strong symbol, an immediate dialogue, and a powerful spiritual dimension. He said, I then wanted an architecture that resonates with the history of the place by providing a direct echo of Arab architecture, but one that equally addresses universality. It is the symbiosis that must be found. So before he even started, he immediately created two opposites. He said, well, there's something local, but local is not the thing that's going to draw people here. I need to get something international, a symbol that would make people feel there's something for me here as well. And then initially, he didn't know exactly that it would be a Louvre museum. There would have been an area in it that would have been developed to refer to universal religions and to host almost like a museum for religion. And he said, well, maybe there's something about humanity and all of that. So the whole thing about religion and about something that's universal and that everybody can connect to on a higher level was then what he tried to address. Now, in terms of the more local culture, you referred to the Medina in the old and fortified part of a city that were built by Arabs. So all the modern bigger cities still have these old Medinas in which the buildings almost seems a little scattered. The geometry is not really all that clear. The pathways almost looks like a labyrinth. It's not really straight. And then if you look at that picture and you look at the image on the left and you look at that one, you can see that he basically did the same kind of geometry in the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. So, and then he topped it off with the dome. But what is the dome really referring to? Now he says a day filled with light is one of the signature effects of this building. So light became then a good vehicle to bring another aspect into the building. You can read through that if you want to. I'm not going to go into all of that. In terms of just visually understanding what he was referring to, how light then falls through a forest and an oasis becomes something that he said, well, I think a lot of people can relate to that. And then he said, well, let's try and maximize on that. And then that's the kind of effect that he was aiming for. So if you look at the previous slide, and you look at that slide, then light becomes this vehicle that brings in a world that you hardly ever can experience in an Arab environment, although it connects you to a more spiritual, almost experience, or an elevated experience. The fact that might become almost a universal or a more international experience, I thought this might actually articulate it quite well. That's a photo that I took in the St. Paul's in Rome. That just shows how light falls into a space as well. And then how the light falls into this area, you also call it a pattern of light rain. So it's another element that is bringing into an experience that is offering someone that brings something into a space that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise. And then on the days that he says on certain days the light in there is so bright that it almost looked like stalactites are piercing the dome in that first picture that I showed you. And I think that's again just how to articulate the experience of light and shadows that you find in this area, simply because it's, in a way, it's alien to where you are, but it's so familiar. And then also, the moment he says, when you enter this dome, what you see, you almost experience a microclimate. Because of the sea and the breeze and the fact that air can move through the whole structure, it literally creates a cooler environment than the environment around it. In terms of what it looks like, you can actually see that there's definitely two very strong influences, but the dome has an element that's very recognizable in an arid landscape. It doesn't look out of place. And it actually also acknowledges the local culture. Okay. Then Enrique Morales, they say when he built this archery building for the Olympics in Barcelona in 1992, the building attracted more attention to the Olympics than almost archery did, you know. So it became a very celebrated building. It was on a list of, I think, 38 or 34 buildings that you have to go and see in your life. It was built from temporary precast units. So I think at the moment they've already taken it off site, simply because it needs to make room for development. But what he did, he literally just looked at the geometry or the geology of the site that he had to work on. And then he said, how does an arrow go through air? And immediately you get the contrast with very linear things that's being hosted in a curve-rich environment. Okay. So if you look at the image on the left, that's how the building looked just before they took it off-site. But what was good about the building was just the whole idea of also the fact that you were in a very enclosed space, but there was a lot of movement, and it was very purpose-specific. And in a way, and he succeeded in creating an incredible, varied experience by the kind of elements that he chose for the building. Right. So if you look at the sections, you can also see in terms of the forms, there's, it's a rich experience that he's offering. So in terms of, and also the textured panels that he's used, it's also culture, it also gives acknowledgement to the culture that he's coming from. I think one of the great things when you're going to Spain is the fact that you see the craftsmanship in Spain is incredible. I love making sculptures, so for me it was incredible to go to museums and look at the craftsmanship that they've got. They're absolute perfectionists in how they put things together. It was fantastic to see that. And you can actually experience that on the sections of this building as well. Okay, so if you want to try and engage with something by association, I think there's a few words that can actually help you. And it's just the whole thing of doing things that seems to be completely opposite. And that can be in real life completely different and with no associations at all. Words like juxtapose, superimpose, stitch, merge, blend, divide, and contradict, words like that. I think that helps you to actually get something that can actually inspire creativity. Because what you're looking for is not what is known. You're looking for something that's unknown. And from the unknown, you'll make connections that's new, and then you can apply that to your work. And I think that's actually, that's the whole focus of my talk. Just a quick reference on myself. I've got a dog that I think is the cutest thing on earth. I like music, I like sculpture, and like photography. So that's why I am interested in creative processes. Yes, and I work on different scales. That face is about a 200 by 200 relief work that I did. The sculpture on the right-hand side is about 3.7 meters high. So, yeah, and then the last two loves of my life is then architecture and my family. So yes, I think that gives you me in a nutshell. So thanks.
Thank you so much.